under the pulpit, and in 20 minutes it drops them into the basement so you can have coffee. So mine will drop into the basement in 90 minutes. So come on forward if you can. It'd be easier for me to talk. And I think that in honor of all you people that got here early, we'll get started. Let me answer a couple of questions that came afterwards. For 14 years, I ran Star Commonwealth and came back to Michigan, where we created this whole Reclaiming Youth Circle of Courage with Broken Leg Ben Bacher and others. The last several years, we've been helping Star Commonwealth develop its global learning network, which also includes TLC, Trauma and Loss of Children, and Glassman, which is a clever name to get you interested because it's racial healing. And you can't go up and say, hi, can we offer training for your racist staff? But if you say Glassman, they say, oh, what's that? And it's a kind of butterfly in the South African or South American jungles and so forth. Because of some interesting challenges Star Commonwealth is having financially, being located in Michigan, where our residential programs are very heavy with that. Costs $300 a day, the state pays $175, to figure the math. So they're running their core trainings in our South Dakota office, where we've been doing this, is now tied with Cal Farley's. And if you ever get a chance to go to Amarillo, Texas, visit Cal Farley's. It's one of the most interesting places you'll ever see. On aeronautical maps, there's a circle where you're not allowed to fly over Cal Farley's because the kids make big rockets that they send up thousands of feet with cameras and so forth. And the students will, it's such an example of strength-based because you take kids that haven't succeeded and so forth, and you get them hooked on learning, and the kids will take you to the learning labs and have you meet their robots, and the robot will say, hello, what's your name? And you'll say Hector. It will memorize your face and then call you Hector from then on. So anyway, they also have rodeos and other wilder things. Well, I kind of used up some of this. You see the problem they thought is that we would all be piled in a little room. It's not as intimate, but let's go for this thing. This is kids who outwit adults. Inga Bolin is one of our colleagues. She's a German-born anthropologist in Canada now, and she points out that traditional cultures, many places in the world, knew how to raise respectful kids. And we have lost that because of many things. For example, in all indigenous cultures of the world, if you are my mother, now the age is off, and you are sisters, then I have 6 mothers. If you in the front here are my father with your ponytail, and you are brothers, I have 4. That is in Africa, that is in North South America, it's in the Pacific Islands. You see, everybody figured out you need a strong ecology. Mothers always were too young, too immature, died in childbirth, but you had many mothers, many fathers to carry that on. So one of the things that she did was to write books as a sociologist called Cultures of Respect, rearing children in cultures of respect. It's kind of an introduction for talking about kids who don't respect adults, which is what we're going to do here. And so everywhere in the world, you use these systems. These are practical principles. By the way, the kid pictured there is the same one on the cover of that book. He's now a teenager. First of all, you connect them to caring adults. And I don't know if you can see the grandfather there. I asked the group, what message is the kid getting? And somebody said, brush your teeth. So you sit up front you see he has lost most of his feet. So what happens in traditional cultures, no more than 10% of the time are kids in same-age periods. Now think of that is the way the human brain is designed. Don't finish self-control until you're 25 because you're going to be surrounded by older peers and we're pro-social and so forth. So what we've got is a massive misfit between modern culture where kids are, you kind of group them together in immaturity brain levels, like, kindergartners together. You ever go to the mall and there's this jumping place where parents just sat and all the kids are like going crazy themselves? Well, so you need, first of all, to connect kids to caring adults. And then, whenever kids in traditional cultures are reared, they are saying, always take care of younger kids, show them the right way of doing things, teach them things, and always look up to older kids. And where we're saying, let's keep the older kids away from the younger kids because they're going to pollute them. Thus, we don't even have opportunities for kids to grow up learning how to take care of younger kids. Well, I know in school they have these assignments where you have to keep an egg alive or keep from breaking an egg, as if that's anything like taking care of a kid. So, is that boy going to drop those little kids down in the water? Who did they look up to? Who did they want to be like? Okay, and Vygotsky figured that out years ago, that the brain is designed to look at people just ahead of you in talent and to be particularly interested. So in the United States, the DARE drug program doesn't work according to the research on evidence. So they're retooling it. So instead of having Officer Grimsby tell you not to use drugs, the 7th graders will come and tell the 3rd and 4th graders, along with the officer and so forth, so to use that system. And then you literally, in all cultures, teach kids rituals of respect. You talk about things as they happen so that kids develop that respectful way of doing things, something that we've lost. I'm an adopted member of the Rosebud Lakota Sioux tribe. If you keep acting like a relative, they surprise you with a ceremony and make you one. And on our next reservation nearby, Pine Ridge, they had an experiment with substance-abusing adolescents, Native kids. They would bring them, after they got them dried out in the drunk tank, to the granny trailers. And you had some Lakota grannies that had their trailers, and they would like it, tea and jelly toast, and then sit down and tell these young people how all their relatives think they're so wonderful that now you know. And you would use those problems as a way of teaching kids ways to be more respectful. And then, in all indigenous cultures, kids are given more responsibility than in Western culture. In Western culture, when we talk about that, we talk about a hurried child, like a book by David Elkind, which isn't really responsible. It's just like nobody's doing surveillance on this kid anymore. So, if in the United States, if in the UK you leave a kid with a babysitter under 14 years of age, it's a chargeable offense. Everywhere else in the world and in traditional cultures, kids are involved in that from the beginning. And then it's absolutely crucial, says our gal from Canada, to make young people feel like they're contributing to others, have a sense of purpose beyond just some self-serving purpose. Well, that's a kind of a philosophical introduction, and now I'm going to pick up on something that was too long to fit in this morning. Okay? Epigenetics, something you're going to go and talk with everybody about. You'll say, have you heard about epigenetics? And they'll say, I know. You say, well, we learned this thing. Let's hear it. Epigenetics. And epi, this morning, I said means on top of. So something's on top of genetics. Basically, we kind of coined this little phrase, designer genes. Our genes are really made to be redesigned by our experience, which nobody figured that out until now. And if you go in the back of any new book and they don't have epigenetics in the index, it means the person that wrote the book hasn't yet figured this thing out, okay? It's going to take a while. All right, so we have very resilient brains, and let's show how this works. Epi, of course, means on top. This is how the environment shapes our genes. So if somebody says, what are you actually doing in your youth work, to say, I'm redesigning genes. Because literally, the experiences that we have redesign our genes, and we'll show you how it works in just the next few minutes. First of all, remember we said this morning, big disappointment, only 20,000 genes. More or less, we're still arguing about the number. But it's right up there with the round number. Now, I actually don't think round numbers are so stupid. They can detect 1,000 different chemicals in the soil, which you can't do. Okay. But the reason they thought there'd be so many is that we have lots of different proteins. And anything that you design in the brain or body needs to be designed by proteins, and the genes give the instructions for them. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take you back to a student taught off of my minor in biology. So this is a really quick review of genes in sex, okay? All right. Everybody in the room has 23 pairs of chromosomes. You got one from your and the other. And the bigger the chromosome, the smaller the number. Notice chromosome number 1 is the biggest, all the way down to the mismatched pair if you happen to be a male on XY chromosome. Okay, now you can avert your eyes if this is too sexually powerful. Here comes Spermmobile. And on board it's got 23 chromosomes, and it's hunting for a pig country. And when it gets together, now you have in every cell of your body, with some technical exceptions, in every cell of your body, all of your genetic code is there. All of your chromosomes and all the genes. Now, why would we want to put those all in there? Because you only need a handful to make skin or hair or motor neurons, or red blood cells. But what you've got is a bunch of backup ones so that when you have different kinds of experience, like a really nice caregiver at the runaway shelter, it redesigns your brains. Okay, here we go. When we start out, our very first cells, after they've kind of reproduced, are embryonic cells. Okay, in this case, embryonic stem cells. If those cells were carrying a little sign, it would say, I can be anything I want to be. At this point, the cell hasn't differentiated, so it could become hair or skin or liver or whatever else we're in. How does it do that? It turns on a specific set of genes to make it one of maybe 200 different kinds of cells. Okay? Now, once it is decided, I want to be skin, it will keep reproducing with those same cells. It won't turn into a liver growing on your cheek the next day. If so, see your doctor. Okay. Now, the amazing things, the people that discovered this double helix shape of this, which was actually discovered just before I took genetics in the late 50s. Crick, who discovered it, said, well, I realized that only a small amount of the DNA is genes, so the rest is junk DNA. One of the greatest mistakes in science by somebody who had actually discovered this particular chromosome. Why would we waste all of that, putting all that junk inside every cell in the body? The answer is, God don't make junk. If he did, he wouldn't be that inefficient, would he? Okay. So, the junk DNA has 4 million epigenetic switches, 4 million gene switches that turn a gene on or off, dial it up or down. Once that gene changes, the cell operates differently. I mean, it's still hair or neuron, or retina, but it's going to be able to do different things because of these gene switches. And a massive study called ENCODE, where they're trying to map that out. If you think mapping the human genome was tricky, figure out how we're going to map all of this. Okay. So, epigenetics is most active in young brains. So several people I met this morning said we work in a pregnancy program or that sort of thing. Okay? During that developmental period, your brain is churning out so many cell divisions, and it's just multiplying so fast that almost anything during pregnancy can affect that in some ways. You'll see that in a moment. Now, the most interesting study on this was done by Michael Meany from Canada, McGill University, and I had the opportunity to spend a couple of days in a group studying with him. And he came up with this idea. I wonder if the quality of caregiving changes genes. In other words, a real loving, nurturing mother versus a neglectful mother. Now, you can do lots of things with the little mammals called the Norway rat or a mouse that you can't do with humans. So that's what he set out to do. And the way he did it, he found 2 kinds of rat mummies. One rat mummy, shown here by the heart, is very nurturing. And whenever the little babies are upset, mother grooms them. Well, she can't do it this way with her tiny paws, so she licks it. So that is what calms little babies down. Oh, my mama just licked me. Okay. So you've got these rat mothers that are just, they're just licking like mad to keep all of their little babies calm and happy. And what happens then is those rats produce resilient, stress-free, intelligent offspring. What do you suppose happens with neglectful mothers? You see, all it is just measure how much contact it gives them when they move around. It produces emotionally disturbed, high anxiety, stressed out mice. Now, this is not genes, it is epi. So, if we were to take one of these unfortunate little ratlets and put it back here, it turns into a bright, resilient rat. Or if we would demote one of these and put it with this mother, it turns into emotionally disturbed. In other words, the quality of caregiving is determining the adjustment, even in something as simple as that. How is it doing that? It is good caregiving down-regulates the stress system so that you don't stay stressed, you don't panic, you learn how to cope with stress and then calm down. That's virtually the definition of resilience system. You can cope with stress, okay? So, the whole science of resilience and trauma now has to be retaught because there's a whole new science telling us literally the things we do to kids are designing their brains and bodies. And because a high portion of genes are expressed in the brains, that's where we're kind of focused. Okay? You get the general idea? Okay. Here is my meaning. Nurturing care turns on the genes in the brain that regulate stress, and poor mothering silences the genes so that the stress reaction, think traumatized mouse, keeps going all the time. One of the primary, I'm sure a lot of you have had trauma training, one of the primary characteristics of traumatized kids is dysregulation, which means their stress system, doesn't work. And there's nothing wrong with stress. Stress gets us ready to meet a challenge, right? And then after the challenge is over, we settle back down. But what if, it's running all the time? Bad news. Okay, now the plot gets thicker. Diet, chemicals, things that you put into your body also change your genes. And all of these things developed over millions of years of refinement, evolution, that's that word, of design of the human body, okay? So, if a chemical is in the environment regularly, most animals can manage that pretty well. If it's not in the environment, it has no program for that, but it can screw things up. Watch and redefine your interpretation of some problems. How many of you have bisphenol A in your body? Answer, everybody's hands goes up. 95% of Americans and Canadians have high levels of bisphenol A because the folks that make these plastic water bottles use that in the manufacturing. Okay. Now, they don't want to eliminate it because they haven't found a cheaper way of doing it. But what if we should take this bisphenol A? By the way, if you divide everybody in this room into those with the highest 25% of bisphenol A and the lowest, it will predict whether you're likely to get cancer, heart disease, and other sorts of things. Okay, so this is stuff that the economics of industry will not want to face. Think how long it took the tobacco industry to kind of recognize what's happening. All right, so here we have a pregnant mom. Remember we said, if you want to see the likelihood of something happening quick, do it during pregnancy. So we feed pregnant mama the equivalent dose of bisphenol A from those of us that are drinking it out of bottles. Okay? Here is mama's offspring. That is what she's proud of. That is an agouti mouse, screwed up the coloring system. Can't you imagine the birds of prey will find that one quickly. But it is obese, diabetic, hypertense, and will have a short lifespan. And all of it was created by bisphenol A. All right? Ooh. Next. By the way, in Canada, they now require labeling plastic bottles so that they're free. And you no longer can produce bisphenol baby bottles for reasons that, but, people just don't want to, at the economic level, don't want to face the implications that your body is not equipped for some kind of chemicals. Dr. Sanjay Gupta, the medical specialist on CNN, did a specialty called Toxic America, and there are 80,000 chemicals that don't belong in nature that find their way into us here. And only a few hundred of them have been cleared. For example, nobody knows what they dumped into the Gulf to try to disseminate the oil, or what the effect that could be on us in the future. Because this could get very expensive for industries. Okay. Dads, you're not off the hook. Now, if you take and mess up with the diet, so you give this nice, robust daddy-to-be a high-fat diet, this is daddy's offspring. Daddy, what have you done? Now, the next time you go in a public place and you see the high incidence of extreme obesity in American culture, which everybody's blaming on McDonald's and sedentary lifestyle. Hey, I have a lot of relatives in Norway who are sedentary and eat cream and stuff too. Doesn't help to be sedentary and healthy. But how much of that is because things are in the environment, including high levels of stress? Just this last week, we found out that one of the age ranges in which people are dying younger than their offspring, are are white males in that, 40, 50 years of age. You wonder what systems are changing there. Boys who smoke before puberty, this is an Australian study, boys who smoke before puberty are changing what's going to be the genes that they pass on, and you get the idea, okay? Now, this is so powerful that it is going to change all of the science, except there's going to be people, trying to block that sort of thing too, because who wants to invest in the changes in chemicals and things. All right. We have known for a long time that doing things while a young woman is pregnant, when the fetus is in development, is a real iffy time. And there is science that says all of these things in the list will potentially affect the offspring. War, stress, nutrition, blah, blah, blah. And the biggest of all is the bottom. Because when you lose your culture, you lose almost all of your anchors as to how to keep your world safe and predictable. Mark Brokenley, when he first heard this, said, tribal people have known this forever. Lakotas say, you never bring bad news to a pregnant young lady. In Northwest United States, the natives there say, oh, we've known that, but our rule is you're not allowed to swear when you're pregnant. Which was the culture discovering this before the science, that keeping people healthy and stress-free is going to have some impact on the child. We just didn't know about epigenetics, so we didn't know how that happened. Okay? So epigenetic changes are not new genes. They're turning genes on and off, so at least in theory, it's reversible. In other words, let us say that you're dealing with a kid who's been raised in a really high-stress environment, has lots of these symptoms that we've talked about. The kind of caregiving and nurturing and conversations and belief systems, right, what we think, can help redesign genes in some positive way. I just want to mention one other thing I don't have a slide for. You heard me railing about drug ads this morning. Okay, think of that again now. Those things that are going to happen as side effects. The reason that they list them is the drug takes 4 to 6 weeks to get approved by the feds. All you need is to show that it calms somebody down or whatever a little bit, and you can sell your drug. Then, a year later, people start dying of all these strange things, but the drug is still approved. All you got to do is sign your advertisement or in the fine print. Tell about the nasties that happen, and then you won't get sued. It's amazing. So epigenetic scientists are saying all drug tests should last long enough so that you know what this drug is really doing, to change, like to ruin your kidneys or whatever other things it does. Do you think the drug industries are going to go for that? No. They're not interested, by the way, in selling somebody 4 or 6 weeks of drugs. They want to sell them, months and years of drugs. And so you're going to see lots of new people speaking up to call for very conservative approaches to medication of kids. For example, the kids that we work with, take the recent studies out of the foster care system, were way more medicated than similar kids that weren't in the foster care system. The tendency in recent years, instead of doing therapy, is to pop the pill. And if you can find a diagnosis in DSM, which now is better than ever, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, isn't it nice we've solved all these mental problems? So one of the things that you're going to really want to think through is the extent to which we would be better off being quite conservative. Because there certainly are kids, who if they can't manage their depression might kill themselves. But you can kind of keep kids on these things, you know, what is the effect over a period of time. Okay? Now, before I get into another thing, I'm going to stop and see if we have questions, because I want to just give you an introduction. Now you'll be able to read about epigenetics, and you'll be really interested in it. Yes, sir? Well, if you all of a sudden get tumors and things like that, it may be too far. Here's a good example of your question. What about Romanian orphans? You see, and they were raised in these extremely depriving, environments, where caregivers just, change the covers or something. And some of that is reversible, and some of that seems to kind of create permanent problems with learning that aren't reversible. But the mantra from me, the expert on it, is let's start with the positive assumption. Since the environment produced it, in theory, there may be ways to reverse it. This may not be undoing, but it may be what we call a workaround. All right, I'll give you an example. You're going to meet a picture of John Cena, who wrote this book with me. I helped him write this book, Kids Who Outwit Adults. John Cena is a professor, and if you know him well, he still has flashes of reactions to the stuff that happened to him. But he's been able to develop circuits to work around that. In other words, to spot what's happening to him and to use, higher brain circuits, to calm himself. And that may be what we have to do in some of these cases where there was some damage. The classic study on that with lower animals is called imprinting. Like, if you don't have, if you cover the eyes of a little kitten for a certain period of critical time, it'll never see. It can't be reversed. We don't have so many good examples of that imprinting in humans. We think that we are actually designed, more than other animals, to keep learning over a longer period of time. For example, how long would it take to produce a completely mature human brain based on a very similar species called a pig? There's a 97% genetic overlap, okay? Having raised pigs, when you're in Rome, do as Rome, when you live in South Dakota, your kids want to win the 4-H. They're showing pigs you raise, purebred Chester white pigs. Okay? So, a pig is pretty intelligent at 3-pound birth. It knows enough to run up and line up at the nipples. Human babies, are more helpless. At 9 months, that little piglet is 300 pounds and can be bred. 114 days later, the pig has a bunch of little pigs. The brain of the pig is all done. Human brains are intentionally designed not to be finished until we're in our 20s, so that you can download a culture. That's what we're created to do, is to download a culture. But what if you don't have anything except the youth culture, right? The street culture, a drug culture, negative peer influence? You can begin to see how we have a mismatch. Very good question, though. One other thing that I forgot to say. One of the interesting studies of epigenetics was Hitler got ticked at this group of Dutch village that I think sunk one of his U-boats or something, and he cordoned them off and said, starve them until the war is done. At the time that they were liberated, it looked like babies out of Africa in these droughts, terribly skinny. Now, women got pregnant during the famine. Is that new in human history? You can predict it's happening. Okay? Therefore, we have developed, women have developed systems to accommodate being pregnant during a famine. 2 systems we know of. Grow a larger aorta to get more blood to your baby. Now that, I'm mixing up, that actually is moving for a high altitude. Let's kind of go back to the growth genes. Let's take this specific thing. What happened is the infants born during this starvation period were able to turn 2 pounds of food into 1 pound of flesh. They were very efficient. They also were born downsized, not immature, downsized. So that mama only has to feed a little 4-pound infant. And then when the war was over and you fed them, guess what happened to them? They got obese. Now the really wild thing is they were obese like that for 4 generations. And so neuroscientists quote the Bible. The sins of the fathers are visited upon the children unto the 3rd and 4th generation. You see, usually people figured some of these things out at some level before science did. And so you get this intergenerational transfer. When I was training in New Zealand, one of our trainers there is the head of the New Zealand Social Work Association. He's Maori, they're indigenous people, and he started crying. And he said, I've always wondered why my people can't break out of all this. I realize there's discrimination and stuff like this, but now I can figure it out. You know, you kind of get a cycle going where you've broken the culture completely, you've broken all the rituals of how you rear children. For example, the person who adopted me is Noah Broken, 80-some years old. His father legitimately was called Broken Leg because he limped from having been a horse trainer. But along came the Western boarding schools and they said, whatever your father's name is, it's going to be your name. And we'll give it the name Noah because they were going to make him into, well, he became an Anglican priest. So what happens then is you captured all 6-year-old kids, took them from their parents, put them in the boarding school, whipped them if they spoke their tribal language, reared them in a totally different way because traditional Native people never struck a child. The word for child in Lakota is Wakanche, sacred being. Who would hit a sacred being? And so you disrupt a whole generation, and then you get this thing rolling, across generations. It's too complicated to get in here, but I just wanted to make the connection. One more, or whatever, question about epigenetics. Yes? It presumably will keep operating unless it gets reset. It can be reset by new experience, ordinarily by a new organism, and sometimes it just resets itself in 3 or 4 generations. But maybe I didn't answer your question. Okay, well, think of it, every gene to do its thing has to be turned on. What do I mean by that? A gene that is wrapped like man is suppressed, okay? To turn it on, there's actually coil of stuff that lets it do its stuff. And so experience changes that. Now there's a couple of variations to it, but that's the general idea. It allows this gene to be expressed. So let me give this other example. What if you were pregnant and your people decided to move up to 15,000 feet, which is those first pictures came from Thailand, Peru, 15,000 feet. Now you're pregnant. What's going to happen? You see, your baby's not going to get enough oxygen. So, 2 things happen that have been designed into humans across hundreds of thousands of years. You get a bigger artery to feed the fetus, and red blood cells get redesigned to hold more oxygen. And therefore, you can survive. So epigenetics isn't bad. It's with us all the time. First generation Japanese Americans are much bigger than their parents, right? They play for the National Football League or something. Because diet designed how big Asian people in general are. Okay? So there's lots of different things can. But for our purpose, the profound thing is how much stress redesigns the human brain. And we can work with it. Last epigenetics question. Yes?
Is that the same situation when pregnant moms during a famine and how they experience in the family, but then their body is affected with the fetus?
Yeah. Their body says, this is bad news. Let's redesign how we do this kind of thing. And this is present in other animals. Okay, there's a skink lizard. Okay, and a skink lizard mama doesn't want her babies eaten by a certain snake. So while pregnant, if the skink lizard mama smells that snake, it produces larger babies that can't be swallowed whole. Smooth move. So all through nature, in both plants and animals, we now know there are these epigenetic systems. It's just that we were always taught the genes are destiny, weren't we? And now we have to kind of redo this. We were always taught into how much is nature and nurture. You can't disentangle them, okay? And on top of the genes, which of course you inherited them. See, they figured when they mapped the human genome, I knew somebody who was with the National Institute for Mental Health. He said, oh, we're going to find the genes for, like, name your mental disorder. Duh. The ones that could be found have already been found most of the time. Instead, there's lots of genes which interact with the environment to create different kinds of problems. The best example of that is autism. If you have to have a surgical delivery of your child, you raise the risk of autism because there's going to be some drugs that go into the child at that point in time. If you live in public housing on a freeway where there's lots of trucks going by, if you live on the lower 2 floors, you have higher rates of autism than up on the 12th or 15th because all through pregnancy you're breathing diesel particulates. And in some people's genetic structure, it produces autism. And you begin to see how almost everything that we think of has to be retaught genetics. And we're not going to solve all those things today. Last question about epigenetics right here.
Makes a lot of sense to me, and I tend to think everything affects everything else, but I'm just wondering how controversial it is as a scientific time.
I think it's only controversial from the people who don't understand it. It's kind of like, need I say, is there global warming? If you stand and see the iceberg disappear. The problem is everybody's got to rethink everything because it's such a different concept. All right, but the takeaway, why is this important? The takeaway is the way you help kids manage stress, the way you build social bonds with stress, because social bonds release that O drug called what? Oxytocin, which does what? It tampers down the stress system. Okay? Therefore, regular, nurturing, trusting relationships are actually redesigning how the body experiences stress and potentially making kids more resilient. And if we don't have relationships, then we can't pump oxytocin in there. In fact, the kids out of the Romanian orphanages, when adopted, test very low on oxytocin because they haven't had these human bonds. Okay? Now, Alfred Adler famously said, we're going to have a lot of trouble treating children brought up in an atmosphere without love. They will look on us as they look on all others who hurt them. That sounds like some kids that we know. Okay. So, by nature, children's brains are designed to socially engage with elders. Okay? They are designed that way. Take the next time you see a baby that's 4 weeks old. What's both the adult and the baby trying to do? Eye contact. And that baby is so good at luring in the adult. But more so than adults, kids go through the world asking, should I trust this person or not? And two sides of the brain are in the operation. On the right side of the brain, I'd like you to kind of do this, just so you'll remember this, like you're really worrisome. That's where your negative emotions specialize. Over here, go like this. There's your positive emotions, okay? And in general, then, on this side of the brain, it's like, is this person trustworthy? Should I be afraid? You know, whatever. And so if you come across as being safe, kids will gravitate and build connections with you, right? This side of the brain is operating under the approach rather than avoidance system. Like, is this person interested? So when I was a child care worker, I'd use whatever tricks I can to engage kids. I was a ham radio operator. Said, how'd you like to learn Morse code? Nobody else will know that you're sending it. You know, and you would use whatever your skills were to engage kids. So the kid is looking out and saying, does this person like me? Do I like them? Now, for most kids, all you have to do is like them, and they will like you back because they have such a terrific need for them. And if that doesn't happen, it tells you that this kid's been hurt a lot, so that their natural tendencies to want to reach out are being kind of suppressed by adult danger. Okay. Here's a kid that gave me this information. His grandma brought him to a training that Broken Leg and I did in Denver, saying he's going to sit in because he gets kicked out of school and so forth and so on. And the kid was like wonderful. Afterwards he said, you know, adults need to set up a comfort zone. Don't just dive in. I avoid adults who act superior. You've got to let the kids connect to you and so forth. So it's quite an interesting challenge in our youth work because the kids that come to us are not necessarily leaping into our therapeutic lab. Hi, my counselor, youth worker, whatever. They've kind of learned to be a bit jaundiced by them. And we're going to use the fact that the kids are in crisis as an opportunity if we are the safe person that they feel they can connect with. So when we're doing assessments for the court, we get into a lot of these where the court wants to transfer juvenile into the adult system, especially, if they're Native American or African American, don't have a family with lawyers. We have to really quickly build a connection with the kid we're doing the assessment with, because we think they're the primary experts. But these kids don't like people doing assessments. So you have to figure out a way to come across, as trustworthy and a whole party. And this is where the kids start out. And John Stephen was a kid that I met when he was 12 years old and had run away or been kicked out of 15 placements of the court since age 8. And so they said, well, let's send him to Michigan. It's 5 hours from Cleveland, Ohio. He can't run away very easily. And John Stephen, years later, when he became a professional, coined the term adult-wearing kids. He said, when I became a professional, I went to all of my placements and made them give me copies of my records. And if that wasn't distressing, to see all these diagnoses that people had slapped on me, he said, the only one that really understood me was my court officer, who had less training, but more wisdom. And he said, I had every diagnosis in the book, and he said, my real diagnosis was I was adult-wearing. And if you had it happen to you, what happened to me, you'd be a dang fool if you weren't adult-wearing. So that's the modern origin of that concept. Now, in my business, I also find we have adults who are kid-wearing, right? Don't let them marry your kids. Yes? Excuse me. John Cedar? No, John Cedar is a professor of social work at Michigan State University. I got ahead of the game. Here he is at age 12 when I interviewed him. Okay? He was this tall 12-year-old. Well, I said I interviewed him. He wouldn't talk to me. As you can imagine, I can handle that. I'm not allowed. Push a button, I have a whole semester full of talk. I say, dang, I can see you don't want to talk to me. They hauled you up in that grungy park car. Now, why would I trust anybody? Usually if you do that long enough, they'll jump into it. 45, 50 minutes later was the first time he said anything. He swore at me and said, I'm not going to talk to you. I ain't going to stay in this text was a deleted place. So we sent him back and they locked him up and he eventually came. Okay? Now, the youth worker who engaged John, who didn't trust anyone, and whose private strategy was, if I keep getting kicked out of every place, they'll have to send me back to my mother, even though she was, abusive and alcoholic and prostitute and blah, blah, blah. But she was mother, okay? So anyway, John said the youth worker that got to me was fresh out of the university and was too naive to know I was hopeless. Furthermore, he did make the mistake of saying, let's talk about your problems. What he found out was, well, I'll tell you about the youth worker. He told me, I'm going to relate to John, I'm going to connect with John by finding his strengths, and he has two strengths. What are those? He knows everything about the Cleveland Indians baseball team. I mean, he can tell you their batting averages. It's like a substitute family. And he's really good at fighting adults, so I'm going to fight with him every day about baseball. So he'd kind of go up to the kid and say, you see the sports page? Cleveland lost again, and you're going to get a real team like the Detroit Tigers. And now you've got this conflict going, but it's not very long before they had a bond. The very next thing he did was to find two other people to connect, because otherwise, if you're the only one that connects to the kid, what are you going to do, adopt him? Change your will? So he said, I'm good for baseball, but you need to go for Woody for basketball. So he's got 3 different sports. None of them have said, hi, John, let's talk about your problems. Which would have sent him scampering for the woods. All right, so 1 year later, he actually has run away. He decided he'd run away after the week that we took all the kids and staff I rented a fresh air camp just for ourselves. And he thought that was a treat because the camp is located near Ann Arbor in a little town called Hell, Michigan. I was actually trained by boys from Hell. So he thought he'd go to camp and run away afterwards, but he never did run away. Here he is 1 year later. You look at how tall he is at 13. And over here, I guess I can't do it. In the upper right-hand corner, the white-haired one is old Floyd Starr, 90-something. That's me when I was young and slim. All right, so he's now connecting. And then he has the really good luck of marrying a school psychologist who understands why he does that stuff. Okay? And he has this marvelous little girl, and they, wrote a book together because this was an amazing kind of experience. Okay? But now, I'm going to give you an example of how you've survived the trauma, but the marks are still there. When she was 6, a dark-haired little girl in Flint, remember reading the paper, was killed by another 6-year-old kid that brought a gun from home. Just an accident. John went ballistic. Didn't know her. He made T-shirts with her picture. He gave speeches. He was going to hike across America from Pacific to Atlanta to stop this violence. And his wife said, will you talk with him? I said, I'll talk with him. And I said, you're going way overboard. In your mind, you always lost what you loved the most. And that little girl is a stand-in for your little daughter. And it's a sad story, but it's not something that you organize your life. And John said, well, that's what my wife was trying to tell me. I thought, listen to her, John. She's a psychologist. Okay. So when we would go to visit John, he'd be down in the basement, and he's teaching her softball. And she now has a scholarship. She's older than me, and she's a scholarship softball picture. She throws it almost as fast as the men do the hardball in the World Series. You know? Okay. So John called me when the movie Good Will Hunting came out. He said, "Did you see Good Will Hunting?" Now, in case you didn't remember, Will Hunting was this highly abused, very bright kid who is required to go see psychologists, and he destroys one after the other, because he's a better psychologist than the psychologist. You see, these kids we work with had to learn to be good psychologists to navigate the dangerous world, and so they may be more skillful than some of us who, I have my degree in criminal justice, or even psychology, but the kid has been practicing it for a long period of time. So he called me and he said, "Did you see Good Will Hunting?" I said, "Yeah." "Did it remind you of anything?" I said, "Yeah, that scene where for a whole session you wouldn't talk. That reminded me." He said, "I won that game in therapeutic chicken, didn't I?" But it was short-lived. Eventually we got him back. So he said, "How about this? I've ordered up the screenplay. Let's put ourselves on the program in our annual Black Hill seminars, which are now going to be in July of every summer, sponsored by CF Learning. They've kind of taken that over, so come and see us in Black Hills. Anyway, we'll put it on the program. We'll call it The Good Will Hunting Effect, Kids Who Outwit Adults, because that's what Will Hunting was. He was just better than the adults. And who should read it? I'm at the Ford Foundation in New York City, and somebody invites this woman over to meet her, and it turns out she's Matt Damon's mother. She actually has a PhD, writes books on media and violence. And she says, "Why should I go to Black Hill seminars?" I didn't know she was Matt Damon's mother. She didn't have that name. I gave a little promo. She said, "Well, I'd be interested in coming because I see her using my son's book in one of your presentations. But I'll only come if nobody tells who I am, because it ruins your life to be Matt Damon's mother." You go to the grocery store and tell Matt. Okay. So anyway, she fell in love with John Cena and offered the last day to introduce our session. They'd all met her when she gave a keynote on media violence. And so she did this. And so out of that came this book, and Matt's mother got him to do the foreword, as you can see right there. She said, "How would you like Matt to do the foreword?" I said, "No, it has to be a certified mental health person." "No, I'd take Matt any day." Okay, so what we did is we went around to the different places in the English-speaking world where we're doing training, and we asked the directors of programs, "Have you seen Good Will Hunting?" Most of them had. "Do you have kids like that outsmarted the adults?" Almost all of them did. "Would we be allowed to interview your kid and find out how they do it?" "Well, I guess so." And the kids loved it. They said, "You're going to do a book about this?" "Oh, I got a lot of advice." And so they give all of the strategies, and they were really terrific. Like this one kid says, "Well, when they're doing an assessment, I sit really, really close because it makes them nervous and I can read what they're writing on the paper." This girl in New Zealand, in Australia, we actually had her speak at our Black Hill seminars. She said, "I'm a street kid, and one of the things I learned is you need to have a social worker that watches your back. So I always build a good relationship with a social worker, or what they think is a good relationship. And then the problem is they get too close to your personal stories, and you have to throw them off the trail by inventing false problems to talk about. For example, this one social worker got really close, so I said, "Oh, this would be too hard to, all those guys on top. Oh, I never told, oh, you can trust me. All right." And so I tell this animated story of this gang rape, which didn't happen to me, but it happened to one of my friends, so I knew the details. And then afterwards, I said, "Oh, This is so helpful. Can I bring these problems to you at times like that? Do you know a kid like that? Yeah, they're really wonderfully talented kinds of kids. Because you see, like they say, oh, the kid's psychopathic or whatever. The kid is coping. Think of almost every symptom, unless it's something organic, physical. Almost every symptom is really a kid trying to cope in a way that you would prefer they'd have a better way of coping. So, what we found out was that kids use 3 kinds of major strategies: fight, flight, and fool, or they form a group follow if you wanted to have before and after. So let's talk about fight. The art is done by a 12-year-old kid in a youth program in Chicago. So the private logic, I don't know if you're familiar with that term. It was created by the psychologist Alfred Adler 100 years ago. And he said, if you understand the private logic of the young person you're working with, you can design better interventions. If you do not know the private logic and goals of the young person, your interventions may be wrong. So these are kids who have a kind of a private logic. I got to hurt people or I'm going to be hurt. And you're shaking your head because you know some kid like that, right? Yeah, that's their strategy. Are they crazy? No. How did they learn that? That's right. They survived this experience, and that's how they cope. Now, that's a bit of a problem because the kid is like being obnoxious. Remember I opened with the story? That was kind of Ron Anderson's style. Okay? And there could be lots of variations of that, but that's one particular type. Okay. Almost seeming the opposite is flight. This is a kid that sort of says, I got to hide or I'm going to be hurt. You know the kids that put their hood over there, they won't make eye contact with you. Put your arm around their shoulder, and they like cringe away or something else. John C. himself knew how to mix and match these. You know, I'd say usually he was this way, but if you kind of moved on him, then he'd get verbally aggressive and so forth too. All right. This is a strategy. Some of us are actually better working with this kind of kid, aren't we? Often people say, well, that's more like I was. Or you can see what you're going to get when you're dealing with those kind of kids. Some of us are really afraid of those kind of kids. Okay? I think a lot of public school teachers are terrified of these kind of kids. They don't have any experience with them. And particularly if the kids are from a different cultural background, they kind of woof woof it. Teachers running scared. Okay. Hide or be hurt. How do kids hide? I'm using that very broadly. Disengage from relationships. How about run away every time you get stressed? How about medicate yourself and retreating? There's lots of those kinds of strategies. And they're all strategies. Okay? They are attempts to cope, which might have some short-term value or not. In the long term, they probably create problems. And then there's fool. These are the kids that don't have to shift to their lower brain, because the fight-flight is way down in the brainstem, right? It's there. And when you shift to that, you're not even thinking logically up here, right? Neural hijacking. And a lot of adults are really losing with kids. And some of those cops that we see on these pictures on TV, they kind of lost us. They're not operating up here. But the fool kid is composed. They're calculating. They're figuring you out. And of course, they can end up with diagnoses like just this manipulative psychopath. Manipulation means to manage skillfully. So it's a strength. And so, for example, we were working on one kid who had grown up in his first 6 months in an orphanage in South America. with no nurture, with syphilis, because his mother, this was her third kid, a teen mother, and she gave him syphilis. And so this kid had a lot of problems as he matured and developed. And when we were interviewing him, I discovered he'd been in different care systems, and so he was writing a book. And I said, oh, where's your book? He said, well, one of the staff is going to type it down and copy it. Well, I knew what happened to that. It's going to go right back, to the prosecutor, and they're going to say, look what this kid is. So I said, oh, let me see your book. and I took it out of there. And it's beautiful. I don't have the slide on it, but he's got this drawing on the cover, and it says, this is for youth placed in government facilities across America. If you follow this, you will be able to cope. And then he describes how to handle it. He says they'll have point and level systems. Here's how point systems. You got to play their game with points. Be sure that you make friends with some staff member, because you might need them when you're going. If they try to do mental exams, like they'll ask you questions like this, and then he gives the questions. How about sleeping? Always sleep up, or you get more questions. So it would make the kid look very manipulative, but why is he doing this? Because he doesn't trust adults. This is his, and so the beautiful thing is this may be the most sophisticated kid. And these are the ones that are going to be on your staff someday, if you can, turn this thing around, because they're very, very exciting. I'll give you an example. This particular youngster, called Jeffrey, was kicked out of the special ed behavior school, and he was kicked out of all of the mental health residential programs in his state, because they said he's delinquent, like he organized the other kids to set off fire alarms and sprinkler systems in the group home. And he gets kicked out of the delinquency programs because they said he's crazy. Look at the scar from here to here when they had to cut him open to remove the arrow that he put up in the top of his brain through his eye. So nobody knew how to do. So now he gets expelled back to the alternative school, special ed unit, where they couldn't handle it in the first place. So I'm going to assess him. So I go through his file and I find interesting stuff, and I use that to connect with him. I said, wow, I found this in your file, and I show him this. I said, you were in second grade, I think, then, okay? You think most second graders are doing that kind of Halloween art? Kind of an angry kid. And then, if you find other art, turn to somebody next to you and tell them what you think this kid has experienced. I did that with a group of teachers, and the biology teacher says, is this horticulture? Is he growing plants? No. It ain't a plant, right? What is it? Oh, you know it. Okay. All right, so this kid had been sexually abused from before he started school. So he comes in, the guns blazing, so to speak, and then what does the school do? Yeah, they kick him out. In fact, with this first drawing here is a note to the mother saying, once again, he has been, using profanity, and we are depriving him of recess all week, as if that's going to be the solution. So once we connected with him, he was amazing. And one of the things he said, when they kicked me out of the psych facility, I brought with you, and he carries it along, I brought with the list of symptoms. When they put me in the psych facility, residential psych hospital, they said, the staff are going to be looking at your behavior and charting to see when you have overcome your mental illness. And so he said, I take the symptoms, and every day I go out and do 5 of them. Is he like me or what? And of course, he just outwits them all because he thinks they're playing with his mind, and he's going to mess with their mind. Now, the trick is not to get sucked into trying to be just as clever. And so in one of our trainings, we actually practice how you would connect with each of these kids. Like, so we have a little table, and the table, you be the kid, you're the mentor trying to connect, and you be this wild, angry kid, and how do they connect with them? That's the fight kid. And we practice that, you know, with the more withdrawn kid, we won't talk. And then we practice it with a cool kid. We tell the cool kid, we call him Rude Rudy, go in and sit down and insult your mentor. And whatever they say, think of another insult. You sound very angry to me. Oh, you would know it? Are you a fake psychologist? And, of course, it's really hard for staff to figure out what they're supposed to do, and some of them want to kind of get the smart alecky back. Well, why is he doing this? Because he doesn't trust adults. So if you know that, then you can figure out how to get past that in some sort of way. So anyway, we eventually brought him to a residential program in Michigan. And Harry Wilson, who was once the deputy administrator of your big national organization in the Bush era, okay, he was in charge of this kid. And we made Jeffreygrams so that everybody on the team could see what Jeffrey's trying next. Okay, he's been here 2 days and he won't come out from under the tent, you know, on his bed. He won't go to school. And pretty soon Jeffrey would try different things because he's trying to get staff to kick him out. But see, if you know he's got that strategy, then it's like kind of fun. So to see what he's going to try next. And eventually, he's in the program and he had his biggest problem with his group leader therapist, Michelle. Because, as he told me, she keeps trying to build relationships with me. Regardless of what I do, she treats me respectfully and stands up for me. So I finally had to use my number one main intervention. What was that? I told the other guys the reason she's so nice to me, we're having sex together. I said, oh, how did that work? Yeah. Not well, he said. She explained to the other guys in the group why I do this, and they confronted me, and it was kind of embarrassing. But eventually, you see, what he was looking for was someone you could trust. Sometimes we don't have to long enough to pass all the tests. There's no reason we can't make a few notches on it, because it's starting to change the scenario in the kid's mind that nobody can be trusted. Nobody's going to treat you fair. And if I provoke them, they'll provoke me back. One of the members of our team is Scott Larson, who uses faith-based programs in 300 prisons in the United States. Basically, he recruits people motivated by their faith tradition, but not going in to proselytize kids that are into mentoring. And he says, some of you will send kids who just come out of lockup, and you will mentor the community. And the kids aren't going to trust you. And you have to hang in there and not give up. So this one mentor went out at 9 o'clock on Saturday to meet who he's supposed to see. He's not met the kid. And the kid wasn't there. But he'd been trained to go back, so he went back several Saturdays in a row. No kid. Finally he said, I'm a fool. Wasting my time. I'm not coming back. And as he walked away for what he thought was the last time, somebody said, hey, I'm Andy. Are you looking for me? And later he found out Andy was there every week. Watching him walk away, just thinking, yeah, we'll see whether this guy's for real or not. See, I think when they can figure out that these people, you people here, aren't for real, if you hang in, you have lots of potential power. Here is two of my colleagues, and they wrote this book, Growing Up in the Care of Strangers. The top is Brown PhD, who had a horrendous background, and then John Stephen. And that one you could get off of Amazon News Books or something like that. Been around just a few years. And each chapter is written by someone who is a mental health or youth work professional who had this kind of background similar to the ones we're working with. I actually found that when I was training people at Augustana University, my last course on working with troubled children and youth, I would tell the class, I said, all right, this is your field now. First half of the course, every one of you is going to take turns having a whole class where you talk about the three most important things that have shaped your life, and you get to pick what they are, negative, positive, and negative. And what I found is that half the people that go in this had some version of these kinds of backgrounds themselves, which was motivating. And sometimes the ones that didn't have any problems felt like, oh dear, I grew up on a dairy farm in Iowa. We had more milk from a cow, and everything was wonderful. I don't know how I'll be able to work with these kids. And then we build them up and say, no, you're the one that knows how the world should be. As long as you can figure out the strategies that the kids are using. Because your strategy is to connect with these kids. That's what we're all about. So our whole idea then is to strengthen this circle as we talked about. Here's how the restorative justice colleagues of ours present these ideas. They have on the left is control, from weak control up to high, strong control, right? And on the horizontal are connections or relationships from weak to strong. And so there's 4 possibilities there. Let's start up here. Here, you have high control, but very little investment in relationships. It's authoritarian, probably punitive. You're doing things to kids. You can think of people who operate there, can't you? They aren't invested in these kids at all. And so they get into these kinds of problems. Picture the owl is the adult and the kid or the group is the tiger. They get into power struggles with these kids who can tell, this person doesn't care about me, this person doesn't like me. Or they become little drill sergeants of some sort, and they're going to kind of whoop this kid back into the line through punishment. Now, remember, the kids are showing what Jim Anglin, child care professor in Canada, says pain-based behavior. Your kids are showing pain-based behavior, right? Depression, all these. And so then the natural punishment comes from the Latin word pain, which means pain. So the kids have pain, so then the system decides what we're going to do is we're going to administer more pain. There's kind of illogic to it, but we see it. The third possibility is that we try to fix what's wrong with them. Hi, I am your therapist. We're going to redesign you. And kids don't like that any better than they like, a drill sergeant coming after them in that way. Okay? Now, at the opposite kitty corner here are these people who have lots of warm fuzzies with kids, but no influence. Fritz Bradel, my mentor, said they're friends without influence. The kid doesn't need a grown-up version of a friend who doesn't have any influence. So, here's one example. The staff is trying to rescue this kid. Okay? Who gets weak? Staff gets weak, and the kid doesn't learn to stand up either, does he? Okay? Or they just pamper these kids as if they're little babies instead of putting expectations. Or the adult becomes like the kid. Remember, you had a staff member like that? Swear with the kids. Boundaries were all lost. see, when you turn in your card-carrying adult credentials, you have very little power. They don't need another peer. Now then, there's still another group down here. They're scoring low on everything, right? I call this 25 years of experience. You know, kind of disengaged, uninvolved. Okay. Or they just grade the kids. You know, and that's how they're going to keep away from kids. Yeah, I used to go into residential facilities, and a lot of them had little glassed-in offices, and then they had a yellow line painted like "No Youth" in there, and then the staff hide in there with the records. And as Al Drishman, my colleague in Boston, once said, you know, if we tuck the records in the beds, they'd get more attention. You know, put the kids in the files. And then excluding. That's that zero tolerance, suspend kids, expel kids, lock them up in the justice system. And we went through a tremendous push in that direction. I often ask people, who do you suppose was the one that funded boot camps? And usually somebody says Bush. It was Clinton. Clinton, who knew that if he played the tough on crime card, then Democrats couldn't play it. So I was on the coordinating council. They knew boot camps would work. We told them that, hey, it did work for political purposes. And almost all of the boot camps then closed because they were abuse already happened. So what we're really trying to do is over here, we're trying to kind of create this alliance and work with these kids. And here, borrowing 3 concepts from what I talked about this morning, the goals of our little rap course, connecting with kids. When the kids can figure out that here is an adult who believes in me in some sort of way, even when I don't believe in myself, you know, they look into our eyes to see if we have hope, you know, when they've given it up. The great Ukrainian youth worker, Makarenko, is supposed to have had one of his teachers say, I have no hope for that boy. And Makarenko said, then henceforth, you will not be allowed to communicate with that child because your belief system is poisoned. The kids don't have hope. See, the pioneers knew this stuff, but then each generation has to kind of find it again themselves. So we connect with kids, and connecting is a sort of a shorter thing than relationships. If I ask you, who are your relationships with, you probably talk about some family members, and, you know, some college mate, you know, some close ones. You probably wouldn't give me your caseload. Okay? And the difference between a connection and a relationship is very important because some people have relationships, but they're still not connected, like a lot of parents don't connect with their kids. And you can connect with someone even before you get the relationship. Example, at our Blackville seminars, we often would have a van load of youth come to be on the program, and this group regularly came from up in Saskatchewan, Canada. And we were going to do our tour of Mount Rushmore and Praise Rush Memorial in the buses that took everybody out there for ceremonies. So we got this youth group onto the buses, and the last kid to get on with his dark glasses, kind of hiding behind them, new youth in that program, finds the only chair open in the bus is beside my wife Jen, who's kind of going along. So he's stuck sitting there. Okay? And so they were together on the next few hours as they toured the Black Hills. The next morning, that whole group is on the program, and the youth are talking about how they do peer helping programs to help one another. Okay? And it's wonderful. And this new kid who isn't expected to talk takes his dark glasses off and signals that he wants to contribute. And he then says, he's a native kid, he says, I grew up never to trust a white person and sharing that. But frankly, I grew up never to trust an adult either. And he's like telling about things that happened to him. It's just like amazing. And afterwards, the staff were saying, wow, nobody knew this stuff. He disclosed it, and nobody knew. And Janice said, oh, I knew. He told it to me on the bus yesterday. You see, there was somebody saved. And when there's someone saved, our program says, share things that are burdens with somebody who's saved. And if they don't, it's because we haven't yet been able to help this kid feel safe with us, which isn't necessarily our fault. Sometimes it takes more time. Okay. Once you connect with a kid, then you can help them change how they think. What about skipping connecting and just start trying to solve the problem right away? See where that goes? Kid is not motivated at all. So now, what we're doing, and one other person inspired his heart, he told another kid, he said, you know, in our peer groups, don't make an excuse about your behavior because they hold up a mirror and you see everything is looking at yourself. So we help kids think through. For example, if they got kicked out of class, let's figure it out. How does this happen? Did you go to school this morning saying, I want to get kicked out? Well, no. So how did this happen? Teacher's a bitch. See, that's kind of where you start. But then you have to kind of build a timeline. And you sort of see there's actually a sequence. Kicked me out for no reason at all. I see, what were you supposed to be doing? You're supposed to be, opening our language. I see. So the teacher just came up and said, excuse me, you're kicked out. Well, no. So what happens then, kids figure out what their part is. They start to look at, is this thing working for me? Is this not working? Those are powerful changes we're making. Just administering punishments doesn't work. You know, Fritz Radel said this. Punishment works under the following conditions with our kind of kids. Number one, you have to be able to deliver some pain legally that you can get away with delivering. Because these kids experience some pretty high level pain. Right? Kids I work with in Detroit won't look at anybody for 2 months because you get shot on the street that way. No. They're going to respond to little token economies. Okay. You've got to be able to deliver pain. And then the kid needs to connect the pain with his or her behavior. Is that the connection they make? The pain is because, you're a jerk or something like that. But you can deliver the pain. Let's say the kid connects it to behavior. Then the youngster is saying, oh, my behavior causes pain, so I need to change my behavior. Is that what our kids do? Yeah, they say, I won't get caught doing that again. I'm going to be slick the next time. So you got to deliver pain, connect it with the behavior, have the kid want to change, and then tempted 3 months later, the youngster is supposed to think about this. It just doesn't work very well. So there are way more powerful ways of doing this. Okay. Restoring. That then finally is helping kids create this balance that we have in their lives. Okay? I'm going to just go ahead here. I think actually I'm just going to take a question or two because we're supposed to quit in a couple minutes, aren't we? Okay. I go to the class. Who's got a question from somewhere? Yes. Sure. He's saying, I'm not sure I have a big scientific understanding. Will I be able to understand these books? That's really our goal, is to create books. Our reading level is at grade 12. We actually run it through, so it's not like grade 4. I think Trump's speeches are at 4th grade level. This may be why he's getting a good rating. So we'll stick with grade 12. But I think that the challenge is to connect practice with theory, okay? Because often theory seems off somewhere else. Anyway, I'll just sort of close with this. John Cena has become this marvelous, resilient scientist at Michigan State University, and he's got a following of people at the university who are studying with him, who used to be in the foster care system, in the justice system, in something else. And I think the beautiful thing is that while the rest of the world hasn't yet discovered that this one science applies to everybody that works with kids, teachers should know about positive youth development. Therapists should know about positive youth development. All youth workers should. And forever, it has been marked by youth workers who saw every young person as having potential greatness, and they engage these young people in a positive way. I think if you wanted to get some books, a lot of things we didn't get to, but they're in the other kind of books. The Deep Brain Learning book can be ordered from the nonprofit CF Learning thing, and that group is spending out a website up and a bunch of other things, but they're just getting it set up. But those two books, I think you'll find each of them very readable and understandable, and so if you want, and if you find them online used or something, save money. It's great to be with you, and what a nice little workshop we have.
Do it now before you leave the room. Thank you. I've got extras here if you need them.
They should have just got